Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's mix walkthrough may turn out a little differently than some of the other ones. I will try to be less detailed, which is hard for me. The track is courtesy of the lovely Lewitt lads and ladies, see it alliterates, and their microphone company, and they have provided us a track, The Seeds of Your Sorrow, from the band Spitting Ibex. I think I've heard the name, but I can't say I know anything about them. I won't really waste any time in preamble because there's no A-B comparison. Oh, I guess there kind of is, but that's what you'll do if you're watching this, particularly as somebody else who's participated in this challenge. The bar, so to speak, was set by White Sea, Mr. Snake Oil himself. Just to create a tiny misconception, this is not the first time, or White Sea's video is not the first time that Lewitt competition people have been able to sort of see behind the scenes on somebody's mix. Check out what I did with Marina. But without being petty, of course, back to this. So my mix of Spitting Ibex, The Seeds of Your Sorrow, and then I'll walk through my rationalizations and why I made the decisions that I did.
Could you tell me what does it need to be free? Oh, I can see people are blinded by their anxieties. Prisoners of hate, older slaves of major insecurities. What you sow, the seeds of your sorrow. You can deny it, you preach it and you hide it. Intoxication caused by the venom you're spitting. It ain't true just because it's written. You can deny it, you preach it and you hide it. Compassion and love need to appear, detone temptation of anger and fear. Could you tell me what does it mean to live a life in unity? Oh, I can see people are divided by their society. I'll reach out my hand to make you understand. We gotta stay together to live a life in harmony.
There we go, my mix of the Spitting Ibex track as per the supplied stems for the Seeds of Your Sorrow. Now, as I said, really didn't know anything about this act. As I said, I think I knew the name and therefore that such a set of people existed. So I came into this really fresh, but I did go and I discovered it actually through White Sea, seeing his mix video and going, oh, okay, Lewitt's doing this again, because I've been involved in all of these from St. Agnes Move Like a Ghost on. And I was unsure, to be perfectly honest, of this track and whether I wanted to do it. I thought, look, I will go over, and because I've enjoyed doing all of the tracks so far, but listening to White Sea's mix, and to be honest, even when I listened to the official single, I still wasn't in love with the song myself. Now, as a mix engineer, you don't always have to be in love with the material, but I felt it wasn't for me. But nonetheless, I thought rather than make a decision, I would download the stems once I'd finished all my customer work, put them into Reason and see what I felt. And I felt much different once I'd got rid of other people's mixed decisions. I felt like the marketing and the mixed decisions that other people had made, and I'm not saying they're wrong. This is my mix. It's my ideas. Is that I felt that there was a lot of emphasis on, the impression that, as an act, aren't we so clever because we've used drum machines and we've mashed all these things from different places into one time, and the mixes made out like that they were making a big deal of these things all at once, which to me meant that the thing that's actually the most valuable in here, which is actually the lyric of the song and the delivery of the music, was really kind of playing second fiddle to a lot of what to me was sort of trivial ego stuff. So I set about doing a mix the way that I would do it, in the way that I felt that the material was best served. The stems, of course, we'll run through the beginning of that, came across nice and neat and tidy, and generally very, very well named, except for a couple of things here that I'm like, what on earth are they? But it didn't take long to work out what they really were. Drum machine-y stuff and a loop. Everything else was good and clear, very easy to organise. So as always, top marks to your Lewitt guys. This is what you need to do when you send stems to somebody, because I wasn't having to chop the name of the song off the front of every single stem and that sort of stuff. The first decision I made was to look at the vocals, because that initially was a bit that was causing me some concern. It's like, am I going to get into this? And I realised, okay, well, we've kind of almost got two parts to this vocal. There's the jazz bit, and then there's the modern bit. And my approach was to say, well, okay, how are we going to treat these? And so the decision that I made at that point was to say, well, okay, let's see if I can put them in a place. Let's see if I can put them into a space. So if I take the vocals and just solo them.
What does it need to be free? Oh, I can see people.
Actually, I'll just go in and kill off. So it's always a pain having to use one screen when I use three. I'll just kill off all of the processing, because otherwise we're not hearing what I walked in with, and therefore the mix walkthrough is not entirely fair. And this guy. So I walked in with these vocal tracks and had to feel, well, okay, how do I get to a point where I feel like I can relate to this and love this? I didn't like how dry I was hearing them in other recordings. Now, the main official single, I was surprised how reverby it was for a modern track, which is great. So my first thing was I've got 3 reverbs that I currently have sitting there ready to go, so I can just flick them in. The first one
I
was
can
this.
see people are blinded by their anxieties, prisoners of hate.
And it's one of my own. I've used it before. I think I used it with Marina and the cats. Is designed to be a really old-fashioned kind of plate. Very little stereo.
Slaves.
And straight away I'm starting to like this voice. I was like, okay, I can feel something in there. The next reverb that I auditioned is
Of major insecurities.
a short one, which I made it myself. Don't always use it on a lot of things, but when it's right, it's right. It's made from a couple of my my VST delay units to create a rather unique sort of short hall or room with a bloom shape to it.
You will reap what you
It didn't give me everything I wanted, but then when I got to this section,
deny it, you preach it and you hide it.
it felt much better. So I realised then, look, I was going to need to split these things. Actually, also to be fair, I need to get out our master processing. I will leave the one on, just to be kind. And the clip just in case, because we don't want anything nasty to happen. So it'll probably make it easier to A-B between my voice and the...
Intoxication caused by the venom you spit in need to live a life in unity.
But this far more intimate reverb didn't work for the main thing. And then the other one that I have is, again, one made by me entirely. I find I far prefer reverbs that I make, and this is a whole collection of, again, one of my little VSTs, which is a single line, and running 4 of them to create quite a digital hall.
Oh, I can see people are devalued.
So it's bright, smooth, quite early digital hall. By putting the 3 together,
I can see people are blinded.
I felt like I really liked that sound. You've got a nice rich sound. Normally I won't run multiple reverbs, but occasionally it just feels right. And in this case, no one reverb wanted to cut it. I tried changing the settings to, sort of make it do all those things at once, and it just didn't do it. It didn't work. So I split out this part of the vocal.
Can deny it,
because it moves differently. And same 3 reverbs, but I just reduced from -12 to -18 the amount of send. So it's still in the same room, but she steps forward. She being the singer. Sorry, I don't know anybody's name here. I haven't gone on my way to try and find it. I'm working on the music and what I hear. So if I pronoun you, it's simply because that's what I know about you. No more, no less, no judgment.
you preach it and you hide it.
So that brings that forward at that point, which puts us
what you saw
in this beautiful flowing space to make the most of that style of vocal, and then tightens it right up for these. I found one section I was unsure. Initially I left it here, and then I thought, no, that's not working with that kind of reverb setup. But in the end I wanted a little bit of both. So I quite simply, just with the clips, did a little bit of crossfade, so that without you even noticing,
compassion and love need to appear. The eternal temptation of anger and fear.
It just transitions. You don't notice that transition, but it just washes the end a little bit, which means that it connects a bit better, I think, with the music. Again, they're very sort of personal choices as to what I did. Like Marina, I mixed this from the vocal down. I was aware of everything else. I had everything else still running within the mix, but I'd lowered the buses. Because the first thing I do with any mix is put everything into buses. So my vocals went into buses. My main live drums went into one bus. There were a couple of extra bits and pieces which turned out to be drum machine type things. The bass, and put them into one rhythm bus. So it's very easy to just basically turn everything down. So I pulled everything down, just worked on these vocals. So we'll pull that out of the way because that's really all we need to do with the mixing board. And the arrangement here matches exactly the way everything looks on the desk. So drums, rhythm stuff, melodic stuff, vocal stuff. No sound effects stuff because I haven't used any sound effects. Well, there are a couple, but they're not standout or standalone sound effects. So we'll start with our main vocal. You'll see that I have sliced this up a little bit. There are times where certain words are just not prominent enough. I've tried to leave it as dynamic as possible because in the jazzier section, the singer and the piano are very much working their dynamics together, and I don't want to undo that because there's a real nice dynamic and liveness in that. But there are a couple of times as you get into the mix where I start to feel like, ooh, it's just not quite cutting it. So times where I've had to move that. And at the beginning, they were actually clicks and pops. Now, they're not Lewitt's fault as such. It's just the singer has a clicky mouth. So I don't know whether that's from an injury or one of the most common things there is, being dehydrated. So, my dear, if you're smoking a lot, drinking a lot, doing other things a lot, just be careful. Drink a little bit more, but that's a sign of dehydration when you're getting little clicks. So I had to go in there, find them, like zoom right in on the wave, and you can find these little bits of distortion and slice them and just sort of ease so that goes away. Normally, I'm not super fussy on that kind of stuff, but we were having clicks appear that I could hear.
Need to be free.
And they just stood out so much with the nice jazz piano and this vocal and click. Yeah. So it's one of those things that as a mix engineer, you've got to make decisions on. And I was being easy, and then I realized, look, I'm hearing these. They're bothering me. They're disturbing me, not from a pedantry point of view, but because I don't want to hear them as a listener. You know, there are lip smacks and stuff like that, which are normal. That's all part of saying I'm dealing with a person. I'm listening to a person. Clicks, not attractive. So the processing for this first main vocal, de-esso, does help in this case, does help. Then I've actually been playing around with the Analog Obsession stuff. I know there's a lot of chatter, and it's the coolest thing to be telling everybody to go get the free Analog Obsession stuff. Actually, I have an error when I put on the oversampling. It often crashes one of the other devices in Reason. But again, I wanted to go really easy here. I wanted to keep this vocal as dynamic as possible, so we just mostly left it alone, but just as she's gone a bit over the top, then I've allowed it to be hit a little bit harder, so the evening is done there rather than messing with the quieter bits, because the quieter bits need to be more subtle. That's all it does. I didn't push any more out of it. Just nice and simple. The la-la is actually a nice compressor for a fairly transparent unit, and even when you can hear it, it does a nice job.
Of major insecurity.
I added the delay after. I'd got most of my sound and even on the other vocal, and then I was like, okay, I need to add some delay into here, but I decided to put that before drive.
What you saw.
Because I then wanted to take her voice and give it a little bit more character. Her voice changes a little bit depending upon how she's delivering. Sometimes that can frustrate me. I want something that ties a vocalist together. I know she's got separate parts, and that is great when a singer can deliver separate parts. Bohemian Rhapsody, very separate parts, and that's cool. But when the voice seems to change within one part, that I've never liked it. I didn't like it when Karen Carpenter did it. Right, wrong, doesn't matter. My mix.
What does it need to live a life in unity?
So put her through a very soft overdrive. This overdrive tends to strip a lot of the bottom end, and then just balanced up the bass and treble to get so that it kind of sounds the same, but we add just a little bit more grit and a little bit more evenness to that vocal. It would soak up some extra little transients as well, anything that slipped through the la-la. And then when I was working these sections, no doubt is it's probably the screams, because Scream is known for this. One of them ended up phase inverted. Now, obviously, they're the same microphone, so we can't blame Lewitt for saying, your microphones are out of phase. It's just something that Scream does. So I added this to invert the phase of one of them. I really didn't care which one it was. This was the first one there, so I inverted the phase so that when those two came together, they didn't go whoop and disappear into a hole. Very embarrassing. That was it. I then just used this to get my levels the way that I wanted them to be. Because anyone who knows me knows I don't use the mixing desk anywhere near as much as other people might, because I'll commonly make my levels on the devices here before it gets to the front of the desk. Just old habit. Now we can close that down because we've done that. This one, it's the rap vocal. It just got called that because initially I pulled out the rappier bits. Same thing. Bit of de-essing.
You preach it and you hide it. Intoxication caused by the venom you're spitting. It ain't true, just...
I have gone easier than a lot of people would. Again, I want to keep it dynamic. Scream again.
Because it's written.
But I've used the tube sound in this case, which is a little more aggressive. But I wanted to bring that forward and give it a little bit more roughness, a little bit of sandpaper.
You can't deny it, you preach it in your heart.
So that helps push it forward in the mix and delay.
Compassion and love need to appear. Detone temptation of anger and fear.
That's it for that. And then just the overall vocals together.
Oh, what we saw, the seeds of tomorrow.
Sorry, I forgot this. I'll run through this again with vocalist, main line. All I did was cut off some of the stuff we don't want in the lows, and there was a little bit of plosive. I didn't make a big deal of that. I didn't go tight, but just lightened them up. With the main vocal, didn't feel the need to change any EQ at all. Put a little peak here because as I was going through, as the mix got busier, the rap section was struggling a little bit to cut it. So that was all I did there. And then for the vocals overall, just gave them air because I want them to come through in front of everything. And that's just pretty standard mixing. Give them some air. They did go through a FET drive. Again, analog obsession stuff is just using it on everything kind of thing.
Reach out my hand to make you understand. We gotta stay together to live a life in harmony.
Just gives, by using small amounts of harmonic processing and dynamic processing, but a small amount of those at once, one after another, especially with other effects and what have you in between, just brings things together. And while these vocals don't ever really sing together, it gives that overall sound to the vocals. And I have had no problems whatsoever giving them a slightly old-fashioned sound. I didn't want to go as old-fashioned. I didn't want to go 40s like with Marina. I felt this mix, I wanted it to live more in the late 60s, early 70s. Not that I'm trying to copy all of those moves, but I just, like I've put her in a room, I want to put the performance into a space and to some extent a time. It's got to have a location. The lyric is about, getting on together, so there's shades of Summer of Love 69 and what have you in there. So just taking advantage of that, using that. That was my vocals done. I was happy with those. I then went to starting where most people would start, which is the drums. Now, drums have come through, as would be common with live drums. We've got separate kick and snare and what have you. You'll see that I've just balanced them up the way that I felt was right. There's no sort of prizes on the rightness of mixing drums. Sorry, just making sure that my solos are right. So we'll solo just these drums for the moment. Again, as is usual for me, everything goes to the same reverbs. Drums I've pulled back a little bit because otherwise they'll end up being too reverby. If you listen to them soloed, then yes, you hear a lot of extra taps and what have you, the little tick 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 coming off them, but it's all what happens within the mix that counts. So we had bright kick and a warmer, meatier kick. So I gave a little bit more emphasis to the brighter kick, gave a little bit of boost just to pull out the things that I wanted, and same thing here, but just pulled out some of that sort of mid-muddiness that was inevitable with that. The snare again came in two halves. It's a top and the bottom, which is going to bring out the jangling metal. Initially, I had a lot more top and not so much bottom. Gave a really nice warm sound, but as the mix filled out, the snare was not quite cutting through. It needed more presence. So I gave it some presence in the top, but there's only so far you can go before it starts to sound unnatural. It's not meant to sound like an 808. And then just left actually, sorry, got the wrong ones. Yeah, so a little bit in the top there, and yeah, nothing in the bottom. Hi-hats I left alone right till I finished the other parts of the mix. Went through the toms, because they are just full of bleed, as is normal. Floor tom not so much, but it's got plenty of ride in it. So I got those up because I knew that they would just spill city. No dramas. They're going to help me balance, and so I just use everything else to bring the actual balance. And then the ride track, which doesn't do a lot until we get to the point where it does something. And then we've got this beautiful full ride sound. I did high pass this a little aggressively just because it had so much going on in it. I didn't want it to be messing up with my kick any more than necessary. So it's the only reason for a high pass on that. So we've got these three that are almost like overheads, which brings me to the fact that we do have, the mallets were just cymbal rolls. I think that they were done separately because they don't seem to have any spill in them. And our overheads, I've kept the overheads a little bit low. You will see that I have reversed them. So the stereo ended up being differently from the way that I've perceived the kit to be. So I'd set my balances for my kit as I was bringing all the instruments in. I liked it, I was comfortable with it, but some people see a kit with the hi-hats on one side, some people see it with the hi-hats on the other side. depending upon which way, whether you're a lefty or a righty, you'll then arrange the rest of the kit. So turns out that my view of the world and their view of the world were not the same. So fix that simply by swapping the stereo over the overheads. Yes, the drummer might know. He might not. Will a fan care? No. So it was a case of keeping the panorama that I'd set up, because that was also going to impact on the overall mix, because I'll pan my drums not just for the drum kit, I'll pan them for what they're doing with the rest of the mix as well. So if you wonder why that's backwards, that's because I brought in my overheads and I'm going, what happened to my... Because of course with them being on that side and me being on this side, we'd kind of put it back into mono again, got it right, and suddenly my stereos were good. A little bit of drum room. Wouldn't have bothered me at all if there was no room in this, because I've got quite a lot of room happening here anyway with my reverbs, but I put a bit of it in because it helps tie everything together. That's drums mostly. What I did, I should have had that up. This is one of these analog obsession things. Normally I'm not a big fan of one-of wonders, but this one is an interesting fellow. Very easy to overdo it with this guy. You're winding up thinking, ooh, that's good. And it could be. But this record needs a more subtle feel. It is to some extent a jazz band, but in great extent it's kind of a soul band. It's a late 60s mishmash of things. So I wanted to mix it more like a soul rock record with some jazz leanings. So I've actually backed off our inputs, which is probably part of our drive and compression, and only used a tiny bit of this to give us some of that rock punch that we want, but not enough for it to cause any dramas. And then the tape effect here, which has a really nice way of giving brightness to the metalwork. The saturation there works really nicely. It does clarify a little of the bottom end too, which I think is very nice. I don't use any of the compression or any of the roll off on that. Just the pair of them lets it come through really well. So if we were to bypass them, so it's just overall made the drum kit more splashy, which allows me to drop it back in the mix a little bit, so it takes less room. As I said, these initially confused me a little bit, but we've got a kind of 808 type thing that comes in. It's the first drums and rhythm section that we hear, and it's actually really nice. I was a bit like, okay, what are we going to do with that? But then once I realized how it worked in the piece, it's very intelligently done. And then we've got this, a drum kit. I've left both of these alone. I almost wonder whether that's them having sampled their own kit. I considered, well, is there any point to this? But within the mix, went through and muted it. And
intoxication caused by the venom you're spitting. It ain't true just because it's written.
So it serves a purpose. It does intensify the drum and the rhythm and the tightness of the piece at that point. So it was well chosen. And then the bass. So we'll focus just on the rhythm section. The bass, my friend Scream, using overdrive. Yes, it sucks at bottom end. But it provides this really nice cut. So I wanted a really nice fat bass, which oddly enough, maybe in part just because of the descending sections of note, but actually remind me of Bauhaus's bass from Bela Lugosi, which is not such a bad thing to have happen. So that's just giving the bass a sound, but most importantly, it's got to fit with the piece overall. I've got the way the drums and everything are sitting. They feel like they sit nicely with the bass. So then it's just a case of processing them together. Where did you go? There you are. Yeah. Used very sparingly. This little FET drive is not super obvious, but does a very nice job. It's used just to pull all that rhythm section together, whatever is playing, drums, bass, drum machine, what have you, to pull it, to glue it together, and it does a nice job of doing that. Too much is far too much with this, so most of the time it's left with the drive at nothing or just a tiny bit, but I do use the tone control. That is very nice in clarifying how we want that to feel as a group. And then this guy, the Very Moon, apparently it's a Fairchild. Use just a tiny bit of high pass filter. I wanted to keep it not too modern in feel. I wanted it to feel, not that it was literally from 1969, but as though it could be. I wanted that really tight, everything together, authentic feel. Not to be like, oh, look, I can make records like that. But because this is the way I want the song to feel. My problem with, as I said at the beginning, the other mixes, the work that I was hearing was that it was separating everything out and splashing it across the stereo spectrum and making everything even. I don't want that. I want to listen to one thing. I don't want to listen to 28 things. I want to listen to one thing. And part of great mixing is about pulling all these sections together and making them move as one. And this does that nicely. So it just tightens everything and pushes it into one box. So I was saying that's what we're doing here. And once I had that, then I had these running quietly.
Then you hide it.
Intoxication caused by the venom you're spitting. It ain't true.
Reach out my hand to make you understand.
We actually have a working mix. We wouldn't notice that things were missing. Next one was the piano.
We gotta stay together.
Now I had this running the whole way through. I could always hear it. It was pulled right down in level, but I could always hear it. I noticed that, and this was a thing that I didn't like in other people's mixes, and I went back and compared mine to Whitesey's just to see, well, okay, how did we come out? What's the difference here? How is it that I'm liking my mix and trying not to like it just because it's mine, and didn't dig his? And I noticed that his piano is super bright. It sounds like, and I'm not having a go, this is his choice, that's great. He's represented exactly what we're physically seeing, which is a digital piano. Whereas when I'm listening to this, I'm not feeling a digital piano. I don't want to feel a digital piano even. I want to feel, a lump of wood and iron and wire and leather and what have you. I want to feel this piano, this working man's piano, in the room. So I've gone easy on it. You'll see that I've given it just a little boost to pull it through, because I found sometimes, especially as it was getting busier, that it just wasn't pulling through all the time. And so that just allows it to pull through and makes it a little bit sweeter. But I have not gone into pulling it up a little this, make it super bright and clean and it's too hyper detailed. I do not want this to be hyper detailed. I want it to be warm and intimate and beautiful, and to sit underneath the voice so it pushes up our singer, and that the two of them work together. So we've got our whole rhythm section, our drums and bass working together, and our singer and our pianoist are working together. So pull them together, even though there's no particular processing to do it that way. The way they're EQ'd is to make sure that they're together. The piano's kind of quiet, so I've used a pretty unnoticeable compressor, which is the M class. There's no fun to be had in using M class, but it does control levels very nicely and very transparently, which is why there's no fun in using it. Pushed it on the way in. 4:1 is a pretty heavy ratio for this sort of thing normally, but it's very slow. And you'll see it just flickers on some of the louder bits, which allows me to just creep that up a little bit. And then I found the point where I feel like it fits back in the mix again. There's another little bit where there's another piano line. Obviously, the fellow lacks enough hands to play this at once. Tut tut.
Reach out my hands and make you understand.
That's an incidental piece, and it's really charming. So I've actually given that air. Even though there are vocals at that point, it's a transient thing, and it's lovely. It just comes out of, ooh, there's that thing. So that's been given air to really let it come through. And that's, my piano's done. So once I've got that,
We gotta stay together.
we could again ship the mix. It's a complete mix. We don't feel like there's anything missing. But wait, boys and girls, there is more.
To live a life in harmony.
We've got a couple of guitars now in the mix. The official mix, the studio mix, they have horns. Great, cool, but they're not here. They didn't bring their horn men with them to this session, which meant that they had to cover some of that material, and the guitarist did. Good on him. So he's done a little bit of sound effect, and he's played. I've been given a full cabinet sound that's got a certain amount of effect and what have you on it. It's got the same reverb as everything else. I have done nothing to this. You can see a tiny little bit of EQ to goose what I want, a little bit of body, a little bit of cut. And that's it. Beautiful tone, nice playing. Doesn't sound like a lot on its own, but it's meant to support what's going around it.
I'll reach out my hands and make you understand. We gotta stay together to live a life.
Now, I didn't feel any of this really nice feel from the other mixes I was hearing, whereas I feel like I can get that out the way that I want it here. If it's the way that I want it, I work on the assumption that there are other people like me who want to feel their music the way I do. Therefore, that's why I run with those decisions. I've kept guitars fairly in the center. They're panned, but definitely not. This is not Judas Priest. We want to keep them in the center. Most of my mix is predominantly in the center, allowing the room to come around the outside. So the room becomes really immersive. We've got a massive feeling of stereo, not from hearing things pinning our ears and ping-ponging us, because that's just horrid. I hate hearing that sort of stuff. It's not, you don't get that feeling of listening to one thing. We've got the one thing here, the players are in the middle of the room, and the room wraps around us, which makes it far more immersive and also far deeper this way. There's nothing wrong, nothing worse than those kind of ant farm mixes that they got no depth. They're all width and no depth at all. So nice guitar. And then we got the other guitar. Again, really pleased with it. Not rolling off these lows. We don't want it to sound thin and transparent. While you might go, oh, but you won't hear those. I've given a tiny slice, or 2.5 dB, it's not entirely tiny, but a small, just to drop them a little bit. Same with the high end, because we don't want that to fizzle up there, not too much. I'm just giving them a little bit of cut. The guitars never really work together.
If you reach it in your heart,
Compassion and love need to appear. The tone temptation of anger and fear.
When I'm listening through my speakers, everything's horrible in these things, but when I'm listening through my speakers, which are slightly further apart than arm's length, and when I sit back there on the couch, it gives a lovely stereo field with these guitars here and everything else wrapping around. We've got our vocalist in the center, but the effects, the delays and what have you, move her out just a little bit. Of course, the reverbs move her out. So everything wraps around this beautiful wide stereo field, but through letting the sounds come out there naturally. And that is everything in our mix. It's a whole lot.
to live a life in harmony. We reap what we sow. The seeds of tomorrow. You can do or not if you preach it in your heart.
So then what remained was for me to finish off the mix. There's all our parts, nice and simple, but good rock is good music is simple. You know, there's nothing particularly complex about it. So let's see the rack here. So it's into the mastering. Okay, this is going to get louder. Just live with it, I guess. I'll try not to talk as the music is playing. So we bring this up to level.
Intoxication caused by the venom you're spitting. It ain't true just because it's written.
I find that I'm using a lot less of compression on my masters now than I used to. To me, I find I end up with a smaller sound when I use compression. Plus, you lose a lot of air. You don't realize how much air frequency you lose. All those little details, the clarity, the pin sharp. Well, not pin sharp, because I try to avoid that, but the sense of clarity and air and detail that you put in when you're mixing, especially when you're using saturations to bring them out, you just go and crush it with compression. It just goes blip. And then you wonder why your mix suddenly isn't as good as it was. So I'm using very little. I mostly just want to catch transients, but not too fast, because otherwise, yes, that's where all of your fun goes. So I'm going very easy. It's only a dB or so of reduction at that point. You do it as you like, but I'm finding I'm using a lot less, sometimes even none. Going through Scream's tape, again, tiny bit of compression on that. How its compressor works, I don't know. It's supposed to emulate what tape compression sounds like. I used tape, I was trained on tape, but I don't remember what it sounds like. I remember hating it. I remember whatever you put on tape wasn't what you were trying to put on tape. When it comes back, you're like, oh, that sounds horrible. And you can say, yeah, you didn't know how to use tape, and you're probably right. But I also spent a long time using cassette, and there was no way to use cassette nicely.
Compassion and love need to appear. The eternal temptation of.
So we're using the combination of saturation, a little bit of EQ, so just a little bit of boost on the top, only a small amount in this case, a little bit of cut just in the mids, and that gives us a nice bright tapey sound. Good old soft tube saturation knob, very easy on that fella. And then this, it's a sweetening equalizer with a little bit of
Anger and fear.
I have gone a little heavy here, a whole 2.5 dB of first. want this to feel big and bright and glossy. While it's easy to think that big comes from bottom end, really it comes from top end, because that puts that right up in people's faces and they feel like, wow, this is close. This is because they're hearing all this clarity in the top end. Then it went into the maximizer, and I'm only using the soft clipper. If we listen to...
We gotta stay together to live a life.
That's not a lot of limiting. If we... I find again it just makes the mix sound smaller and takes away high end. So I'm just using soft clip. That's it. Soft clip and a -3 dB on the master of masters to make sure that that's what its top level is, so that it can't go exploding a poor digital analog converter. There's then this fella, which is normally where I will set my overall levels going into my master, but this is a very dynamic track. And if this were a vinyl record in 69, I would not push as hard as I have, but I know that this is going out to an audience of people who are listening to things now, which are too bloody loud, but that's what they're listening to, so this mix has to feel somewhat similar. And it does sound nice when it's kind of pushing the envelope of what should be done. I don't know what my LUFs are, I don't really check them that much, but I reckon we're more like 9 than 12 or 14. But it's more transient at the loud bits because there's plenty of quiet bits. But you'll see that this is automated, and that is here. So what I decided to do is that through the beginning of the piece, it's kind of quiet. So if this were not in, yep. It's 3 dB, which is quite a big boost, but there's a big dynamic difference between the loud and the not loud bits, and we want it to feel more even. So this comes in loud.
The seeds of your sorrow.
It just fades, and people are not likely to notice this.
You can deny it, you preach it in your heart.
So we've got the singer who's quite reverby, but she's forward. We're very aware of her. We're very aware of her as the center of our world, and we move to her. We want to move to her because she sounds great. And then this
the seeds of your sorrow. You can deny.
she leaps forward because of that, reducing the amount of reverb, which is necessary because of the speed with which she suddenly starts singing, but because this is what the song wants to do. It wants to leap forward in that way, but I didn't want it to feel like, oh, suddenly it's a whole new song. I didn't want to feel like we butted these two things together, kind of like in the nasty days where you would make a pattern in a sequencer, and you'd make another pattern in the sequencer, and then you'd put them together like that and go, ooh, look, it's music. It's like, no, I don't want it to feel like that. I want it to feel like it's this one thing that the band's just moved like this.
You can deny.
And this does that.
Anger and fear.
Again with the boost, yes, if you're listening, you can become a little bit aware because it moves fairly quickly.
Could you tell me what does it mean
This is lovely, all this bit.
to live a life in unity?
The eternal temptation of anger and fear.
Now you'll notice that I use a fade in here. It would have been easier to just go, whoop. Apart from the fact that we might have had a pop. I could have solved that with a really fast fade, but we want to still hint at the dynamics, which is part of why I drop it to this level and rather than moving it fairly quickly, so that we get to the end of this section, which even though it's a large section,
fear.
and the piano grows, which is what our brains naturally do. It's just I'm doing it for the person already, because by the time we turn something into a 2-track stereo master and we put it out there for them to listen to in their room, then we've made it much easier for the brain to manage that transition between the louds and the softs. Whether you think it's too much, don't know, but like I said, I was trying to make a very even, consistent record, not a vanilla sausage. I absolutely don't want to make a vanilla sausage, but an even, consistent record that it's one song, not this feeling of bits that have been modularly clicked together or pushed up against each other, more to the point, because I didn't feel like they clicked in. I want them to feel like this one song, like there's this one performance, there's this one band of pretty darn decent players in this one room singing this one song, which has its sections that go up and down. If you have any questions, ask them down below. If you're looking for a mix of this kind of stuff for your own material, talk to me. I will have a listen to, and where I can, comment on some other people's mixes. Feel free to comment on mine as well, as long as you're being kind. Last time somebody gave me like a real hands down your pants kind of challenge. Don't do that, please. It's just not professional. I have opinions. I have strong opinions. I'm open about my opinions. But if you think your mix is better than mine, don't tell me that mine sucks so that I can go and be apparently impressed by yours, because let me tell you, buddy, I wasn't. Thank you, Lewitt. Thank you, Spitting Ibex, for the opportunity to meddle with one of your songs. It has been a pleasure. I have actually really enjoyed it. I had my misgivings going in, but in the end, I've really enjoyed it and been delighted with my result. But because I've become delighted with the song, and that's what really counts. You have a great day now.